Global time, everyone. This is Audrey Tang. It's my great pleasure to be virtually here at the Global Solutions Summit 2021 to talk with you a little bit about human-centric digital governance. As you know, I'm Taiwan's digital minister in charge of social innovation. Social innovation means everyone's business needs everyone's help. It is to address social needs in new and non-traditional ways, especially through collective intelligence. Take COVID-19, for example. We encountered this once-in-a-century global pandemic, and everyone have to come up with all sorts of measures to prevent the virus from spreading. To address these new needs, Taiwan adopted what I call a fast, fair, and fun approach, which is based on the innovation through people-public-private partnerships. Anyone, for example, can pick up the phone and call the toll-free number 1922 to input their ideas into the collective intelligence with support from the social sector. We also work with civic technologists to develop all sorts of applications to show in real time the stock of masks in pharmacies, available vaccinations around the country, and to help making the accessibility to masks and other PPEs to be as fair as possible for everyone. What is key here is our embrace of democracy, humanity, openness, and freedom of speech. With these core values, we are then able to create a friendly environment for collective intelligence. Ever since the establishment of my office, the PDIS, or Public Digital Innovation Space, in 2016, we have been dedicated to changing the public service culture through collaboration and improve government effectiveness through digital technologies, optimizing public service by introducing innovative approaches. So our work is about mutual trust. By reducing the risk, saving the time, and building trust across multiple partners, we have, for example, promoted multiple reforms by holding regular bi-weekly collaborative meetings. We met, for example, to improve the online text filing software experience. We met to help building the ticketing system for the world-class National Palace Museum. We worked to make the Rescue Action by Youth, or RAID project possible, where dozens of students are recruited every year as digital ambassadors in public affairs and encourage them to enhance the experience of existing digital services from the perspective of digital natives. We held presidential hackathons every year, where the 5 winners receive a trophy per year from our president, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, that came with the promise of realizing their idea on a national scale within the next year. So what we aim to do here is to establish a mechanism of mutual trust and dialogue across all the sectors. Now, next, I would like to talk about security. When it comes to digitalization, people often talk about the significance of security. Many countries around the world have always made a great deal about striking the balance between security on one hand and convenience on the other. Taiwan has formulated the Government Digital Service Guidelines to serve as the reference. According to Article 7 of our GDSG, information security, privacy, and convenience should be considered simultaneously during the digital service lifecycle. It guides our development for all government departments to protect and pay attention to personal privacy, cybersecurity, and convenience while collecting, processing, and using data at all sorts of different stages of the digital service lifecycle. To conclude, what we've done in Taiwan is basically a human-centered approach. I think technology needs to work with the people, not just for the people. And I believe that the whole idea is not just one single technology to transform the society. It is rather the other way around, is technology working with the people through the plurality. The society with sufficient data competence, media competence, demands something of us as technologists. And that demand I will share you now with my job description that I adopted when I assumed my post as digital minister in 2016. And it goes like this. When we see the Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear the singularity is near, let us always remember the plurality is here. Thank you. Live long and prosper.
We want to continue this very important discussion. Of course, we all know data is the new gold. That's not something new, but obviously it's about striking this balancing act of making sure that consumer rights are protected, that privacy is protected, but while at the same time making sure that innovative potential in the digital industry is not harmed. Here to discuss this are the following: Francesca Bria, president of the Italian National Innovation Fund. Francesca, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Along with Christian Castrop, State Secretary of the German Federal Ministry of Justice and Consumer Protection. Thank you so much for being here in Berlin with me.
Thank you.
Paul Twomey, Distinguished Fellows at the Center for International Governance Innovation. Paul, great to have you.
Good to see you.
And last but not least, Shoshana Zuboff, Professor Emerita at Harvard Business School. Shoshana, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
All right, let me start with Christian right here in the studio in Berlin, because you've spoken a lot about the notion of human-centric digital and data governance and how it's relevant to the Digital Services Act, to new AI regulation. Give us a sense of what you understand by this.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, of course, it's a big topic, and we can talk quite a lot about that. But I think the general and the principal idea is a very simple one. This is about that technologies and the business models based on new technologies, digital technologies, are conducive to the consumers and the civil society, and not just the other way around. So that's who's in the driver's seat. And of course, we all need innovation, technology, business models, but most of all, we need the major currency of the digital age, and this is trust. Think about AI. AI has a lot of very, very interesting features, and especially, say, within the pandemic, I think it could help people a lot, as other digital technologies too. But think also about discrimination with AI, and think about being non-inclusive. And I think this is what we really need to tackle. And of course, this is an issue of setting certain rules. This is also an issue of law. Of course, it's also an issue of politics, which designs law, but much more. And then I think the main issue of a human-centric digital governance is that civil society, consumers engage themselves in the digital room. And this is also, which should probably be based on some legal issues, which prepare the ground for that. But then it's also about how giving consumer civil society a say, consumer literacy, consumer education, especially for specific vulnerable groups. Think about very young children, think about the old, and there are a lot of things we have to talk about. And it's not just, say, the average literal person here, which is affected, but the whole of society approach. And this probably would also need institutions in the digital room, intermediaries where people can get together and not just being individual within the system, but that we also have collective digital society, having digital intermediaries. That's the core.
You raised a lot of very important points. Let's hope we get to most of them. But Paul, I want to bring you in here because I want to know from you, for a start, where do you see the biggest information asymmetries when it comes to digital governance, to data governance? What is the most pressing issue at this point?
I think in probably the most important way for us to think about this is we have developed out on the internet and even part of that, but a system for running a market, which is not really a market. It's a form of husbandry. Mm-hmm. What we have is data aggregators and platforms, and it's not just the big platforms, there's hundreds and hundreds of data aggregators that people have never heard of, who harvest information and husband information about individuals, but whose actual commercial interrelationship is actually between them and advertisers or influencers. And all of the consumer protection, the consumer issues that we keep seeing, the data privacy issues, they partly emerge because we don't have a properly operating market. What we have is a market relationship between two parties where the product is all the consumers and users and their information. And that's manipulative and distortive of the long tradition around empowerment of individuals, the role of individuals in markets, about choices. And so I think if you were to ask me where's the biggest problem, it's that. And that will continue to be an issue even when it comes to IoT, and who actually, what sort of inferred data about individuals is going to emerge through IoT. So I think thinking differently about the different types of information about individuals and what the roles of individuals should be inside that market, how they can be active market players about their own data, is essential to sort of rebalance. We for several hundred years in the West have basically used markets as ways of trying to promote, in some degrees, truth in interactions through price points, etc. I think that's where we need to get to, and we're not there now.
Paul, I want to challenge what you said there a little bit, though, because you said that the notion is that this contract, let's say between a private individual and a supplier of services in the digital space, can be manipulative. Shoshana, let me bring you in here. Shouldn't we assume that grown-ups who've clicked on all sort of cookies, on all sort of disclaimers, know what they're getting into? They're getting something for free or very low cost, and they're giving their data in return. I understand that we should be protecting children, teenagers, but grown-ups, shouldn't they know what they're saying yes to?
Let me start by giving everyone a little scenario to keep in your minds. In 2018, we got a leaked Facebook document which described its AI backbone, which is its manufacturing hub. And in this description, it tells us that that AI backbone is ingesting trillions of data points about us, trillions of behavioral data points every day in order to produce 6 million predictions of our behavior every second. Now, the mythology that has been created about this, the propaganda, the rhetoric, indeed the gaslighting framework that has been created around this, is what you've just stated, that we're all adults and we're entering into some kind of bona fide contract where we can make a private calculation, give them a little bit of data about us, and in return, we get a free service and the connection and all the things that come with it. That is a lie. That is a lie because most of those trillions of data points that are ingested every day are taken from us without our knowledge. They are taken from us as metadata because the business that they're in is the business of prediction. They have to collect every bit of behavioral data illegitimately from invading what used to be our private experience, secretly invading it, because when we think of it as our private experience, we really don't expect to have anybody else there. So they take from our private experience, translate it into behavioral data that is a surplus. It's more than what they need for that product or service exchange that you're describing. This surplus is valued for its rich predictive signals. So it's not what street you're on, it's the stoop of your shoulders. It's not whether you're Sally or Harry, it's the hundreds of micro expressions in your face which correlate with your emotions, which are great behavioral predictors. So those trillions of data points, most of that is taken from us under the social relations of surveillance, the one-way mirror, using hidden techniques of observations, the technologies of surveillance. And this has created a new economic paradigm of, I call it surveillance capitalism, which has actually become the dominant paradigm, where we are not exactly the product. And here I would change that emphasis a bit. We are actually a source of raw material. And what citizens and lawmakers have not reckoned with over these last 20 years when this model has grown and flourished is the idea that when corporate profits depend upon making human behavior more predictable across every domain of everyday life, and when, in order to do that, once private experience is redefined as raw material for new processes of manufacture and sale, commodification. When those two operations are in play, the economic imperatives that are unleashed necessarily abrogate fundamental human rights and necessarily produce consequences that are fundamentally anti-democratic. And so here too, I would differ in emphasis with Christian a bit, in the sense that, in my view of where we are right now, we are in the early days of information civilization. We are in a similar position to the early phase of industrial civilization, when employers had all the power. There were no workers' rights. There were no consumer rights. There were no laws or institutions to protect and oversee those rights, to govern. That's where we are now. And as we enter this third decade of this digital century, if this century is to retain democracy as a feasible and flourishing form of government, then this is the decade when we have to intervene. We have to turn this around, and we have to do it in a 21st century way, but following the inventiveness and genius that we saw in our forebears in the late 19th and during the early 20th centuries. That is, creating the new charters of rights, the laws and the institutions. This is where we are now. Right. And without those laws and institutions, we are lost.
Shoshana, thank you so much for that. Very, very insightful. Francesca, though, relating to something that Shoshana has just said, we need to intervene. We have intervened. There's been a lot of intervention in the US when it came to big tech. There's also been plenty of intervention on the European stage. If we take a look at the DSA, the new AI regulation, a lot is forthcoming. Are you encouraged by all these new steps that are taken on the regulatory front?
Yes, first of all, I think we should stress what Shoshana just says, that if we want sustainable and democratic digital infrastructures that underpin our future for education, for defeating climate change, to transform our cities for better jobs, we need to move away from a business model that's privacy violating, but that's basically attacking the fundamental rights of citizens, of people. So I would say we need to build technologies, institutions, and infrastructures which have fundamental rights at its core, which I guess that was central to the democratic question that was posed by Shoshana. I think that when we look at EU tech regulation, we are moving in the right direction with bold interventions, such as the Digital Market Act and the Data Governance Act, that will strengthen policies related to competition and antitrust, promising also to curb the market dominance of digital platforms, together with an equally ambitious proposal for revamping taxation, taxation of platforms, and also focusing on open source technology, data portability, privacy preserving standards and protocols. So I think this is all going in the right direction, but probably we should be even more ambitious, because I think that Europe's goal is to really propose a new model. That's not what Shoshana described, surveillance capitalism, which is this kind of big tech first, let's say Silicon Valley business model, but also we don't want the big state. So we don't want to enter into a digital authoritarian model, some form of what we see in China. I think that Europe can propose a big democracy, not big tech, not big state, but big democracy, which is a new digital humanism that guarantees our strategic autonomy, more independence from foreign critical infrastructure, full democratic participation of citizens that protects the environment, the data, and the fundamental rights of people. And I guess we should really get it right. That is about protecting the data sovereignty of European citizens and their constitutionally guaranteed rights. I think this is a very important point. But we can do it also by building new type of technologies, for instance, new governance models on data, such as data trust, where the underlying data, once anonymized and preserved with cryptographic protocols, can be shared to enhance a greater public good. So imagine how much we need data during the pandemic. Right. We need to share medical data in order to tackle the virus. We need to make sure that we share data about our environment and CO2 emission. We need data to improve our cities. We need educational data. We need really this data for the public interest and as public good, I would say, that benefit all society and not just reinforce the dominance of very few players. I think is also a question of a very concentrated market power at this point.
Mm-hmm. Francesca, I also want to thank you so much for that. You said the regulation in the EU is moving into the right direction. Christian, I want to pick you up on that because the Commission has just proposed its new AI regulation just at the end of April, really. What do you make of that, and who would police that?
Who will police that? I guess, of course, this will be a struggle between, say, the European level, which is most important, that it is a European approach. Also for the digital market in Europe, that's very important. But of course, it will also have some national specificities because I think there are certain risks which are true for all European countries, but there are also specificities, especially, say, in controlling the show-up, the pop-up of illegal content. For instance, where I think, you know, in Germany, we have very specific issues where swastikas are illegal. Some other countries, swastikas are not illegal, and especially they are not in Ireland, where a lot of these say, big industry is located for some other reason we do not need to discuss here. So I think it is really an issue about who is controlling what. And of course, then it's an issue about the substance. And of course, we are not yet, I think what Shoshana and Francesca said, it's great. And of course, we do this approach, but we are now, say, I am on the front line just today on the battle of how should the AI regulation look like? How should the Digital Services Act look like? And of course, it will take, I guess, another year, at least on the European level, because we really, from a German point of view, we really want to push all what the ladies just have said to a very great amount. But we still have to face, say, important business interests, and we still have to tell that privacy by design, that's the thing. And as I said, I think the most important currency is not a certain cryptocurrency, which is now in the newspapers. The most important currency is trust. And it's not trust of the consumers and the civil society as a whole. And for me, this is also something which is a marketable business model of a liberal open society.
So in essence, really getting all these proposals through all the parliaments, that will take some time and to actually implement them.
It will take some time, and this is the other issue. I looked at my first answer just a little bit, because whatever we do on regulation, it will take another, say, at least 1 year, say 1.5 years. Then it will come to the national side of that. It will take another year, depending on each country. And then we are 3 years from now. And 3 years from now, as Shoshana has said, we are just, it's 1/3 of the next decade. So technology is much quicker than we are with policies and especially with law. So we need a kind of a front-running approach of civil society, watchdogs in the digital room. That's the point.
Actually, let me pick up on that point and put it to you, Paul, because is there a chance that we will always be lagging behind those data collectors? Let's say big tech or other big data collecting companies. Do you think regulation will ever be able to keep up with them?
I mean, I think one of the key things we've got to address here is a lot of the regulation to date, particularly in Europe, has been about the individual and individual rights, but it treats all individual data as equal, which I think is we need to work more on, and I'll come to that. But the second part is we need to empower individuals to have the capacity to have collective bargaining and negotiation back. So one of the speakers earlier talked about, we're, early part of capitalism, like in the 19th century. Well, I'm not calling for sort of trade unions on the internet, but I am saying we do need to have a mechanism whereby individuals have some point of leverage where they've got the right to say, here's what my type of data is. how I control it, here's who can access it, and on what terms. And those terms they could be economic, but they can be controlled. And if we were to end up with collective bargaining capacity for individuals dealing with all companies, but particularly data aggregators, what will follow is skills will come to the consumer side. At the moment, all the things that Shoshana pointed out, all that skill that sits there, sits on the company side, doesn't sit at the individual side. So nobody else can bring that sort of skill set back and say, no, well, I'm going to negotiate back to you on different points on that. And I think the second part of that is some data is stuff that you can control and it's very clearly yours, and potentially, rather than necessarily having governments say this is an identity card, individuals can control it under some third-party authentication regime. But there's other data that's going to increasingly just be inferred about individuals. It's hard to say I can control things that are inferred about my use of IoT, etc. But we need to, I think also, just as we've had in the offline world, where doctors, for instance, have great asymmetric information about individuals or lawyers or patients, we've had in the offline world rules which say you have to act in the best interest of the data subject. Similarly, in the online world, if you're going to be collecting large amounts, inferring a lot of information about me, it does strike me we need to be saying, that's fine, but you need to use it in my best interests. And simply providing me with better advertising is not per se my best interest. So we need to think through what is personal data and break it into parts and start applying what in some respects are rules that we've used in the offline world for the last 150 years.
You're already talking about some of the solutions there. Francesca talked about data trust. You're talking, if I understand you correctly, about classification. Shoshana, let me bring you in here. What do you think can we use as a tool to make this more sustainable in a way, to make sure that we're not in an unfair environment where everyone's privacy is protected?
Yeah, and I want to talk about that and elaborate on some of Francesca's. And I noticed, Francesca, you've got some great reading on your bookshelf.
Oh, it's yeah.
Did you put that there for me?
It's the Italian translation, yeah.
So, look, so far, I don't think we're, I don't think we've quite hit bottom as far as what it is that we are responding to. So yes, we are responding to something that has already occurred. And I'm sorry to deliver the news, but the real fact is, and this is somewhat mitigated in Europe, but the last 20 years have really overseen the wholesale destruction of privacy. And in my view, that is because we have not yet codified the rights, and this touches on what Paul was mentioning about needing a mechanism. My view is that the mechanism we need is to actually codify what I think of as epistemic rights, that the right to know about my own private experience, the right to know about my own personal experience. That's what in American jurisprudence is called the freedom to select. The freedom to select what is shared, with whom it is shared, and for what purpose, versus what remains private. That freedom to select is a pre-political right at this moment. And it is the cause of which privacy is the effect. Those pre-political epistemic rights have to be codified in law now. And that is part of the legal challenge that we have before us, just as we had to codify workers' rights and codify consumers' rights a century ago. But in order to hit bottom, what I want to say is that these large companies and their even larger ecosystems that are the leading surveillance capitalists, their ambition is not only commercial. Their ambition is really, when you move through the stages of their accrual of power, it begins with taking epistemic rights. Of course, that creates huge epistemic inequality, these asymmetries of knowledge that are unprecedented, the difference between what I can know and what can be known about me. their economic operations are then able to use all that knowledge to create epistemic chaos, this world of disinformation that we're living in. But then finally, society is weakened enough that the next phase of this revolution really is what I call epistemic dominance. And this is where increasingly we see the companies willing to go head to head with democracy in a battle over who defines the social order. What are the rights and principles that define the social order? We saw this in Europe. And I loved what you said about the data and the pandemic, Francesca, because this has been so overlooked by so many privacy advocates. There are times in our society, social solidarity comes first. You can't be an individual, and indeed, rights cannot exist unless we have a well-ordered democratic society to grant them. This is fundamental. So here we have in the pandemic, we saw in Europe, Apple and Google parachuting in at the last minute with their exposure notification protocol, revealing the fact that they were willing to go hand-to-hand combat with democratically elected officials and administrators of democratic governments in Europe to preempt and override the very important epidemiological applications that were being developed within the EU. And the companies won, essentially. And they won through propaganda and public relations and manipulating the public and putting themselves as a wedge between citizens and their democratic governments. And these companies, their executives, Tim Cook, Mr. Pichai, Mr. Zuckerberg, they have not been elected. They have no democratic mandate. They have absolute power to do whatever they want. And now they have absolute control over critical infrastructure and information systems. So this is where I come back to the sense of gravitas about the challenge ahead of us. I completely agree with Paul. We need new forms of political organization and collective action that are correct for who we are today in the 21st century and the tools we have. And I agree with Francesca that the aim here is not to be not digital. The aim here is to reclaim the digital for people and for democracy to actually be solving the problems of real people. That's not happening now. To actually be furthering the ability of our cities to flourish in a democratic way and to solve disease and to tackle climate, all of the things that we expected to happen. Instead of the bold disruption and disintermediation of the old institutions, what we have discovered is that because we were so sure that we were seeing disintermediation, that we didn't realize that what we were actually seeing was re-intermediation. And what has happened now is that surveillance capitalism now provides the institutional forms that mediate between us and the digital. And so to complete this thought and to go back to Francesca, I completely agree. The idea here is not to turn all the power of the digital over to whoever happens to be a prime minister or president at any given time, nor can we keep it in the private sector. This is where the institutional question is paramount. What happened in the 20th century were dozens and dozens of institutions created under public law, under democratic governments, required to be accountable, required to be transparent, where citizens have the right to know and the right to challenge and the right to repair. So whether it's the safety of our food and our medicine, or the overseeing of workers' rights, or the overseeing of our equities markets or our banking system, all of these things are institutionalized in ways that remain under citizen control. In my country, the Federal Reserve Board, that fundamentally remain under public law and have to perform democratically, no matter how the political winds change. I'm not saying this is perfect. I'm not saying that it's not always a struggle, but this is where the institutional question becomes paramount. We have to build a new generation of institutions that will oversee the new rights and the new laws and keep us safe. That's part of our huge creative challenge right now. The shorthand for this is that the digital must live in democracy's house.
So regulations are required. However, how can we ensure that we fully understand the impact? What will be limited for which purpose? Does it block other aspects being welcome? So I guess the sense is, how do we make sure that we avoid overregulation? That's the question, it seems.
Yeah, overregulation is for sure an issue. But we should not forget about under-regulation. So it has to be in the right way. And so I would just go right in line with Francesca and Shoshana. We really have to see how do we create the regulation and how do we create the institutions, civil society institutions. You see, we have two big brothers. It's the state and, say, the big commercial environment. So we need a big sister. And I think this is about political power of the big sister, the possibility of a big sister. But it's also an issue about maybe the economic power. And therefore, it's really an issue that we really have data sovereignty and that we have data trustees, which can also, say, have economically connections with big industry. So we really need, it's not about, say, all legal power, it's also about economic power. And if economic power is just executed in the traditional business system, I think this will be simply too weak for the long future. So I think we really need to think about also new civil society business models. So let me put it like that. And I would add that to Shoshana's well-mentioned political and new institutional design.
I want to come back and talk a little bit more about the pandemic. The ladies, and obviously we've heard there that Paul has also mentioned that how much of a game changer that really was in terms of all the additional data that was being shared, because essentially we all lived digital lives. Christian, the pandemic has obviously exacerbated, amplified the information asymmetries that we've seen.
Yes, sure.
What does that mean for citizens, for politics? I guess it really just...
Let's put it in a simple way. I think, of course, the pandemic has shown how important digital is. So we really have seen it's a lot of advantages for the people, for the collective. So that's great. But of course, it has also shown the risks. And it has also shown that there is an issue of really endangering democracy. Think about all the strange theories about what's happening when you get a vaccine shot and all that. So it's about disinformation, manipulation. It's about dark patterns which are used from a behavioral science point of view. And I think this is also what has become more obvious. So I think the pandemic has shown we need the digital, as Shoshana and Francesca puts it, but we really need it in a safe, civil society-driven way and politically supported and legally supported. And I think, therefore, the pandemic has a lot of downsides, but maybe it could help us also in the project Paul and Dennis are pushing. I think that's the positive side of it. And let's hope that this will in the end be sustainable so that we really get a new, better ecosystem of business, state and civil society and consumers.
Paul, let me get back to you. Has the pandemic also shown us that maybe data protection did hamper efficiency when it came to the public health response in terms of setting up an app, a COVID tracing app? In Europe, that was incredibly slow. If we take a look at, for example, what happened in Korea, that was extremely efficient, very fast, and they were able to detect outbreaks quite quickly. Did we miss a trick here?
There's obviously a lot of ways in which 27 privacy commissioners responded to that issue in Europe. But I think probably more importantly is, and this was an issue Francesca made at the beginning, there is not yet common European law around data trusts, or data trust is actually a common law phrase, but such sort of data commons. And it's one of the things we're calling for, that I think with relatively little effort, Europe could address the legal issues around data commons and be able to use those as mechanisms for having the legal use for such collection of data for medical reasons and others. it does come back to what Christian says, though. For that to be successful, you can put the legal instruments in place. You can put the institutional instruments in place. But if you've not built trust with citizens, they'll be hesitant about using those instruments. So this issue again of giving individuals the ability to control who accesses their information, knowing who's accessing their information, having somebody on their side that can help negotiate the terms under which that is, having the sense that they are more in power, that it's not just these spectacularly capable surveillance capitalism instruments that have power in this. I think that's a key part of building the trust that then we need for things like post-COVID and the next pandemic and the next, if we're going to have data trust, we still have to have trust as well as the data commons legalities. And Europe did this in the 19th century with industrialization. In some respects, you could argue that we're sort of in the 1830s in terms of the industrial history, and that we're now looking to make those transitions institutionally and rights that took place in the next 50 or 60 years that produced, modern democracies. And I think, we do in some respects have in the history of the West mechanisms we can point to and say, we've done this before. There's not a reason why we can't do it again.
Paul, I want to thank you so much for that. Francesca, I'll give you 20 seconds for a final statement because we're running out of time.
Yes, I think I would like to make a final statement by saying that I don't think that regulation and democratic institutions are too slow. I think we cannot rely on a digital oligarchy. We need to do it as a society. And I think we have now a very big chance in Europe, in particular with a big investment program that's called Next Generation EU, where we're going to invest 400 billion into rebuilding our key infrastructures, key digital infrastructures. We can really combine this innovation and dynamism with an uncompromised defense of autonomy, sustainability, and people's self-determination. And we can actually take back control of digital infrastructure, do it in a way that benefits the people and society and the environment. And I also want to say a couple of things. If we invest in businesses that can build technology which put fundamental rights and privacy and democracy first, we can also change the business model. And this can underpin a better society with services that really benefit citizens. And one way to do it is what I've done in Barcelona when I was the CTO. We introduced clauses in public procurement contracts that mandated companies that are bidding for public money to give back the data to public institutions in machine-readable format so that that data can be considered a public good, a public infrastructure on top of which we can build better healthcare, better education system, and better citizen services with also better condition for workers and also with companies paying taxes in Europe. So we do have a chance to build a digital society that puts people and democracy first. I'm pretty optimistic about that. And we are not going to be too slow. I think this is the right moment in the post-pandemic times to actually come together and make this happen. And I think that Europe could lead the way also in a global context.
On that statement, thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate everyone's time. That was a riveting discussion, a very important one, and let's hope that we can lead this discussion, have this discussion in person in the future very, very soon. Francesca, Shoshana, and Paul, I want to thank you so much. To Christian here in the studio, thank you so much for making the time. I know you're all very busy, but thank you for your time. My name is Carolyn, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.